Welcome to the first lecture, where we analyze the symbols and philosophy behind The Lion King. In today's discussion, we're going to go over one of the chief characters introduced from the beginning of the movie. So before we start, go ahead and watch this clip. We have all these animals kind of awakening or waking up, and they all head towards a central spire. Now, this is where we come into contact with the individual that sits on top of the spire itself, and that's Mufasa. So, Mufasa, we get to see what he built, his culture, his community, all right? But the first thing we see is his tower, and there's going to be a lot of tower or pyramid references throughout The Lion King, because many of the chief characters, three in particular, they build their foundations and their kingdoms on specific things. So right now, we're going to focus on what does Mufasa prioritize when it comes to the foundations of his kingdom. All right, so we see the congregation. We see all these animals in the kingdom coming to the central location, this spire right here. All right, this demonstrates kind of the oppressive form that government takes, and it's an oppressive stance that all governments take, okay? Because our natural state, if you look at Thomas Hobbes, for example, a famous political philosopher, he wrote this book called The Leviathan. And he proposed that human beings in our natural state are, violent, brutish. In fact, he called it, or he referred to it as the state of nature. It's the state before rules, before government. So it was a dog-eat-dog state of the survival of the fittest. The strongest will survive. And we, as human beings, understand that that is a life, as he quote says, is nasty, brutish, and short. As you can imagine, with no laws, there's just lawlessness. So government or culture, or in Mufasa's case, his kingdom, is brought to order under specific rules and guidelines. And that's the I'm going to say, responsibility of the state. At least that's what John Locke believes. The responsibility of the state is to kind of take care of our natural rights. But that's a whole different discussion entirely. I'm a philosopher, so I can easily get sidetracked with certain kinds of contradicting philosophies. Anyway, so you could say that Mufasa represents order. He creates rules for his kingdom. A lot of you, the initial instinct with rules are, rules are so oppressive. That's the oppressive part of the state that I was referring to earlier. Yes, they are. But rules also create meaning. Think about this, okay? Money. Money cannot be understood by science alone. Science can tell you what the money is made of, what kind of dye, what kind of cotton, and things of that nature. In fact, I could recreate a dollar bill exactly the same and it still wouldn't be a dollar bill. Why? Because the creation of a dollar bill requires certain rules that go along with it. One of them being it needs to be made by a U.S. mint. Now, my house, my garage, is not the US Mint. So even if I replicate it perfectly, it still would not be considered a dollar bill. The rules associated with it make it a dollar bill. You know, think about territories, the demarcation line between North and South Korea. That thing does not exist in nature. The rules create that line. And try to think that that line is just subjective or in your mind. You'll get a rude awakening by trying to cross said objective line. Objective meaning its existence exists outside of us, like a mountain. Regardless of what I say about a mountain, it's a mountain. 1 + 1 = 2. Regardless of what I think, 1 + 1 = 2. But it's the rules that create the equation 1 + 1 = 2. To go even further, bringing in Wittgenstein, a famous philosopher, language games, and a little bit of John Searle, rules can create meaning. All right? Think about a touchdown, okay? A touchdown only exists with the rules that govern its existence. You know, a touchdown is you need to pass that line. You know, you need to pass inside of the line and not in that corner. And we're still trying to revamp and make the rule even better to make sure it is in fact a touchdown. But see, you know what also rules create? Rules create the possibility for there to be great NFL players. Think about that. That's the benevolent side of the oppressive nature of the government. That's the benevolent side that Mufasa creates. His rules, created in his kingdom, allow for the possibility of great individuals to exist within it. This is what Mufasa creates. Rules that promote peace, justice, and a balance for his state. So Mufasa puts the state even before himself. He says so when he talks about his death, that his death, he will become the very fertilizer that grows the grass that the antelopes eat. Even he is a part of the circle of life. So the rules that govern the state, they even govern him. They even govern what happens to him in death. So while there are oppressive states, in this state, though, it seems to be a just kingdom, you know, and kingdoms are created with the aspect of controlling people's behavior. And if you think that society makes us criminal or makes us violent, I'd refer you to a book by Tomasello called The Natural History of Human Morality, where he talks about primates' behavior, in particular great apes. And great apes would segregate themselves in different tribes. And these tribes were very violent towards other tribes. So much so that an ape defector who was once in a particular tribe and moved to another tribe, if that ape defector tried to return, the great apes would rip him apart violently. So I would challenge any individual saying that government makes you violent and brutal to at least address that concern from Tomasello before moving on. So anyway, in this particular, so that is the oppressiveness of the government. All forms of government have an oppressive tendency in order to establish order. We don't want to be in what Hobbes calls a state of nature, because it is nasty, brutish, and short. We're short-lived, we're always looking over our backs, and we cannot trust anybody. So in order to get out of that, we form a government, or we form a civilization that tampers down those natural instincts. All right. So anyway, that's the oppressive nature of the government. But in this case, we see all the animals congregating to this monument, this hub, and we get to see the king. All right, so we know this individual who's standing on top of the spire, or on the spire that juts out. We see them all congregate to him, and then we see his first chief advisor. And this gives us an idea of what kind of king is Mufasa. And his first advisor is a bird. So think to yourself, why would a king have as his chief advisor a bird? Obviously he can stomp this bird out with ease. So it's not a food chain. It's not a food chain dominance. He's not keeping him there for protection. Obviously, this thing is maybe 5 pounds soaking wet. So why does Mufasa keep a bird as his chief advisor? Well, if you're thinking knowledge, it's exactly right. The bird provides an overview to the entire kingdom and reports to the king, reports to Mufasa. So what does that tell you about this particular king? Well, this particular king, he knows that he does not know everything. He knows that he has, certain deficiencies in his knowledge, in his capabilities. He's a lion, he cannot fly. So he recognizes his deficiencies and he makes sure to build his kingdom with advisors that take care of his particular weaknesses. Now we're getting to the chief characteristic of Mufasa, in that he's not just a normal king. He could very well be a great king, a benevolent ruler. And with that, we get to the second of his chief advisors, this person. Now, isn't it interesting that this shaman monkey is very close to the king, so much so that they embrace each other? Now, this is important because these movies were made in a time where every single cell was meticulously planned out, and I believe that Lion King is such a great example of a great story. I mean, that's why we're going over it. So look at the way they embrace each other and how they picked his advisors, particularly now this shaman. All right. What does it tell you when a great king or a king has as one of his chief advisors a bird and a shaman? What does the shaman bring to Mufasa? This one's a little bit more tricky. All right. The shaman brings an idea that is greater than the king. This king has a respect for a higher power, a power beyond himself. He even lets the monkey perform a ritualistic ceremony on his firstborn son with a smile on his face, and even allows the monkey, Rafiki, to grab Simba, his son, and hold him up to everyone. So we know, or we can conclude that Mufasa is the type of king who believes and understands his own deficiencies and builds his kingdom around those deficiencies, and he looks or believes in something larger than himself. And I'm not saying you need a shaman or the priestly class in order to succeed in this endeavor, But think about the opposite. Think about a king who believes himself to be a god above all of his subjects. You get this. So there we go. Having an understanding of his chief advisors, the monkey and the bird, this king is understood to be a great king. And that's just within the very first 4 minutes of The Lion King. Now, there's a ton of other symbology going on. But what I wanted to focus on specifically are the characters and how the characters interact and the philosophy behind those characters. And this character, Mufasa, he symbolizes the great king, culture, the benevolent ruling of a government that does tamp down our natural inclinations in order for us to live peacefully. So what we see here is a kingdom ruled by a great king who makes sure he has his chief advisor, a bird, so that way he can get a deeper knowledge of his entire kingdom. A shaman, so that he understands there is something larger than himself. And he has built on his rock pillar a society where he states himself, everything you see exists together in a delicate balance. As king, you need to understand that balance and respect all of the creatures. That transforms a regular king into a great king. Culture, just civilization, a virtuous, oppressive nature of government, and an understanding that there is something greater than himself. So, write in your journals, in your Rules for Life, Chapter 1, what you think about this aspect of the great king. And can you recognize, give it a shot, the great king in your life? Doesn't necessarily need to be a person. The great king also represents culture, rules, things we abide by. Can you identify something in your life that takes the form of the great king? See you next time.